In the sand, a hopeless, rejected albino hatchling sat, until a human driver arrived to see it. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the endless sea of sand. The desert planet seemed alive with heat, yet it was silent in a way that made every small sound echo. Small grains shifted endlessly with the wind, making hills and valleys that never stayed in the same place. In this harsh, burning world, life was fragile. Few creatures could survive here, and fewer still thrived. Amid the dunes, a tiny figure moved slowly, almost blending with the sand despite its unusual pale skin. The creature was a hatchling barely hours old, its albino scales glowing faintly in the sunlight. Its eyes, red and wide, reflected both fear and confusion. It had been born on the edge of a nesting ground, rejected by its parents for being too different. In its first hours, it had felt the warmth of a mother's scales, the safety of a nest, but that warmth had vanished. Now it was alone, utterly alone, on a planet that seemed determined to crush it. The hatchling's legs were weak, trembling under its tiny body as it attempted to crawl forward. Each step sank slightly into the hot sand, forcing it to drag itself inch by inch. Its stomach growled with hunger, but no food was near. Around it, other hatchlings had been stronger, faster, or simply more ordinary in appearance. They had left the albino one behind, and the memory of their sharp bites and harsh nudges lingered painfully. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast landscape of gold and orange under the blazing sun. Heat shimmered off the dunes, creating illusions of water that the hatchling could never reach. Its small body shook under the sun's heat, and beads of sweat, tiny, glistening drops, ran down its fragile skin. Every movement was exhausting, but there was no other choice. Survival meant moving forward, even when every instinct whispered to give up. The hatchling paused, pressing itself against a small, shadowed rock, its body quivering. From here it could see nothing but waves of sand and distant cliffs. The wind picked up, carrying fine particles that stung its eyes. It whimpered softly, a high, weak sound that barely rose above the whispering desert. No one was there to hear it. No one had ever come to help. Its world was empty, harsh, and unforgiving. Time passed slowly, almost unbearably. The hatchling crawled a few steps, then collapsed, panting. Its tiny body was coated in fine sand, its scales dry and cracked in places. The sun burned relentlessly, and the hatchling's hope flickered like a fragile flame in the wind. It wondered for the first time if anyone or anything would ever see it, if anyone would care. In the distance, a faint sound began to grow, a deep, steady rumble that shook the sand beneath its claws. The hatchling lifted its head, ears twitching, eyes squinting against the bright glare. The rumble grew louder, and then, like a strange thunder rolling across the dunes, a massive vehicle appeared. Its wheels were enormous, crushing the sand beneath them with each turn. The machine gleamed in the sunlight, metal reflecting heat and movement in sharp flashes. The hatchling froze. It had never seen a creature this large. Its heart pounded in its chest, and for a moment, instinct screamed at it to run. But its legs were weak, its body trembling with exhaustion. The vehicle came closer, and the rumble became a low vibration through the sand, shaking the hatchling's small bones. Yet, despite fear, something in the vibration felt different, gentle, almost inviting. Inside the vehicle, a human driver adjusted the controls, scanning the desert through large, tinted windows. The human had traveled far across this harsh planet, searching for signs of life. Their sensors picked up an unusual reading, a small heat source in the sand, moving slowly but consistently. Curiosity sparked, and they shifted the vehicle toward it. The human had seen many dangerous things in this world, but something about this tiny, solitary being caught their attention. The hatchling watched the shadow of the vehicle grow longer as it approached. The heat of the engine warmed the sand near it, but the hatchling did not move. Instead, it sat in silence, too exhausted to flee, too afraid to hope. The wind carried faint scents of metal and oil, and yet underneath those harsh smells, the air felt safe somehow. Its instincts, so often telling it to hide or run, were at odds with a tiny flicker of curiosity. The human slowed the vehicle to a careful stop, stepping out into the sand with a light, steady foot. The hatchling's red eyes widened at the sight of this new being. It was unlike any predator or creature it had seen, tall, upright, covered in light, flexible clothing to shield from the heat, with careful movements that did not threaten. The human crouched low, keeping their distance but reaching out a hand, palm open. Time seemed to stretch. The hatchling stared unsure. Hunger and thirst gnawed at it, but so did fear. The hand remained still, the human patient, silent almost, waiting. Slowly, the hatchling inched forward, its legs trembling under its tiny body. Sand shifted beneath its claws, leaving a trail that marked each small victory. When it reached the human's outstretched hand, it hesitated. The sun reflected in the human's eyes, warmth and calm in a way the hatchling had never felt. Tentatively, it brushed a claw against the hand. The human smiled softly, and a faint breeze stirred as they spoke words in a calm, gentle voice. The hatchling did not understand the language, but the tone carried meaning: safety, kindness, hope. The human knelt in the sand, carefully observing the hatchling. Using small devices carried on their belt, they measured the hatchling's condition. The readings were grim: dehydration, hunger, exposure. But the human did not panic. They had faced difficult situations before, and this tiny life mattered. Carefully, they retrieved a small container of water and placed it near the hatchling. Tentatively, the creature drank, its body trembling with relief. For the first time in its short life, the hatchling felt something it had never known: care. It had survived countless hours alone, thinking no one would ever see it, and now here was a being willing to help. The sun still burned overhead, the sand still shifted endlessly, but for the first time the desert felt less like a cage and more like a world with possibilities. The human adjusted their position, ensuring the hatchling could rest in the shade of the vehicle. They prepared a small, temporary shelter, simple but protective. The hatchling nestled in, its tiny body curling in relief. For hours they stayed like this, the human observing, the hatchling resting, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Though nothing had changed in the landscape, everything had changed for the albino hatchling. Night began to fall, and the temperature dropped quickly. The desert sky transformed into a canvas of deep purples and shimmering stars. The hatchling shivered, tiny body struggling against the cold, and the human gently wrapped a light thermal blanket around it. The warmth spread slowly through the hatchling's body, relaxing muscles that had been tense for hours. It felt a deep, unfamiliar comfort. The stars above seemed infinite, a vast universe full of possibilities. For the hatchling, it was the first time it had looked up without fear. For the human, it was another moment in a long journey, but this one felt different. They had discovered a life struggling against impossible odds, and they had the chance to change its fate. In the quiet of the desert night, the hatchling slept, small and fragile but alive. The human sat beside it, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. The desert was still dangerous, still unforgiving, but the bond between them had begun. Something simple yet extraordinary had sparked in this vast, lonely world: hope. For the albino hatchling, this was the first night it had truly felt seen. And sometimes, that was enough to survive the impossible. The desert woke slowly as the first pale light of dawn stretched across the dunes. Tiny grains of sand sparkled like diamonds in the weak sunlight, and a gentle wind whispered through the endless hills. The albino hatchling stirred in its small shelter, blinking against the new brightness. Its tiny body was stronger than the day before, though still frail. Its eyes, red and wide, darted around cautiously, aware of every sound and shadow. The human driver, already awake, moved carefully around the hatchling. They had spent the night observing, noting every breath, every movement. The warmth of the small thermal blanket had done wonders, but now it was time to prepare for the day. The desert was not forgiving, and survival depended on action. The human spoke softly, words full of calm reassurance, though the hatchling could not understand them. Yet the tone alone carried meaning, and the hatchling felt it deep inside. Carefully, the human poured water into a small dish and placed it before the hatchling. Hunger gnawed at the tiny creature's stomach, and it approached the offering warily. The human knelt at a distance, patient and steady, allowing the hatchling to drink in peace. Slowly, the hatchling's energy returned. Its legs, once trembling with weakness, began to move more confidently. Small, careful steps, one after another, brought a quiet sense of pride to the tiny creature. The human observed closely, noting the hatchling's movements, its reactions to the sun and the wind. They reached into a small bag and took out soft food, shaped into tiny bites suitable for such a small being. The hatchling hesitated at first, but hunger won over fear. Each bite gave strength, and soon it began to explore its immediate surroundings. Sand brushed its claws, small rocks shifted beneath its weight, and for the first time in its life, the desert felt a little less threatening. The human smiled faintly. They had traveled across many worlds, but this moment felt different. They had discovered a life struggling against impossible odds, a creature rejected by its own kind, and now they had a chance to help. Compassion, patience, and intelligence were all that was needed, and the hatchling sensed this, its instincts telling it that this being was not a threat. By mid-morning, the hatchling had gained enough confidence to venture further from the shelter. Tiny footprints marked the sand as it walked, stumbled, and then walked again. The human followed slowly, careful not to startle it. With each step, the hatchling's curiosity grew. It explored small rocks, sniffed at strange desert plants, and even batted at the shimmering heat waves rising from the sand. The human watched, fascinated by the creature's resilience. They had seen many species struggle, but there was something unique about this one, its determination, its will to survive against impossible odds. Suddenly, a shadow passed overhead. The hatchling froze, claws digging into the sand. A massive desert predator glided across the dunes in the distance, searching for prey. Its eyes glinted in the sun, sharp and calculating. The hatchling instinctively crouched, trying to make itself small, almost invisible. The human noticed immediately. Without hesitation, they moved between the hatchling and the approaching danger, waving their arms and using a small device that emitted a loud, piercing sound. The predator paused, wary of this strange intervention, and then slowly turned away, disappearing into the distance. The hatchling watched in awe. It had never seen such courage before, nor had it experienced protection like this. Its tiny heart pounded, but for the first time it felt safe. The human knelt down again, speaking softly, their hands gentle but firm, reassuring the hatchling that the threat was gone. Slowly the hatchling approached, brushing against the human's hand in silent gratitude. The day grew hotter and the desert sun showed no mercy. The hatchling's scales began to shimmer faintly under the intense light. The human led it back to the shelter, allowing it to rest in the shade while they checked the vehicle. Sand had gathered in the wheels and the engine was hot, but the human was experienced. They cleaned, adjusted, and repaired with careful hands, ensuring that their journey could continue without delay. The hatchling watched, fascinated by the human's skill and intelligence. Every movement, every adjustment seemed purposeful and precise. By late afternoon, the hatchling was stronger, more confident. It began to playfully explore the edges of the shelter, chasing small shadows, batting at tiny insects that crawled in the sand, and occasionally returning to the human for safety. The human laughed softly, a warm sound that seemed strange but comforting to the desert creature. They had grown fond of this small life, and the bond between them deepened with every moment. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the human decided it was time to move. There was a distant oasis not far from here, a place where water, shade, and food could sustain life. It was dangerous to travel, but staying here in the open desert was riskier. Carefully, they prepared the hatchling for the journey. Tiny straps, soft padding, and gentle guidance ensured that the small creature could travel safely without fear of injury. The hatchling, sensing movement and the promise of safety, did not resist. It climbed carefully into a small carrier attached to the vehicle. Though nervous, it felt the comfort of the human's careful preparation. For the first time, it allowed itself to trust another being completely. The journey began slowly. The vehicle rumbled across the sand, lifting small clouds with each turn of its wheels. The hatchling watched the desert pass by, dunes rising and falling like golden waves. Shadows grew longer as the sun fell and the temperature dropped. The human kept an eye on the creature, occasionally speaking softly, offering small sips of water and adjusting the carrier for comfort. Night came quickly. The desert cooled and stars spread across the sky like scattered diamonds. The hatchling, once trembling and weak, now curled in the carrier, its tiny body relaxed. The human paused the vehicle, setting up a small temporary camp beside the dunes. A fire was lit carefully, providing warmth without disturbing the quiet of the desert night. The hatchling, fascinated by the flickering flames, watched silently as the human worked to prepare a safe place to rest. Around the fire, the human spoke in soft, soothing tones. Though the hatchling could not understand the words, the emotions carried clearly: calm, reassurance, and safety. The creature curled closer, tiny claws tucked beneath its body, feeling the warmth of both the fire and the human presence. For the first time, it did not fear the desert. For the first time, it felt that it might survive. The night was peaceful, yet alive with sounds, the whisper of wind over sand, the distant call of desert creatures, the soft crackle of fire. The hatchling listened, absorbing everything, learning from its surroundings. It realized that the desert was not just a place of danger, it was full of life, full of lessons. And with the human's guidance, it might learn to navigate this world, even thrive. Before sleep claimed it, the hatchling pressed its small head against the human's hand, a silent gesture of trust and gratitude. The human smiled, eyes reflecting the firelight, and whispered promises of protection, care, and guidance. They had found something rare in this barren desert, a life that had struggled against impossible odds and refused to give up. And the hatchling, once hopeless, once rejected, had found something just as rare, a companion, a protector, a friend. The next morning, the desert greeted the hatchling and the human with a bright, burning sun. Shadows had disappeared, replaced by a glaring, golden light that shimmered over the endless dunes. The hatchling stretched its tiny legs in the carrier, feeling stronger than before. The night in the shelter had restored its energy, and a spark of curiosity burned in its red eyes. For the first time, it looked at the vast desert not just as a place of danger, but as a world full of possibilities. The human checked the vehicle carefully. The sand had shifted overnight, forming new ridges and soft spots that could trap wheels. They tested the engine, inspected the wheels, and adjusted the carrier to make sure the hatchling would travel safely. Experience and patience guided every action. The human had learned long ago that the desert demanded respect, but it also rewarded care and intelligence. The hatchling watched, fascinated. Every movement of the human was precise, deliberate, and thoughtful. Finally, the journey resumed. The vehicle rumbled forward, crushing sand beneath enormous wheels. The hatchling leaned forward slightly, its claws gripping the carrier, eyes wide with wonder. The desert stretched endlessly on all sides, rolling dunes, jagged cliffs in the distance, and occasional hardy plants that had survived the sun's fury. The human spoke softly, words lost on the hatchling, but the tone was warm, confident, and steady. It felt safe, and that feeling made it bold enough to observe and learn. As they traveled, the hatchling noticed small details it had never seen before. Tiny insects scuttled across the sand, digging into the dunes to escape the heat. Desert plants with spiny leaves and strange flowers clung stubbornly to life in the harsh terrain. A distant cliff glimmered with minerals, reflecting sunlight like a hidden treasure. The hatchling began to understand that the desert was not only dangerous, but alive with beauty and lessons. Suddenly, a sharp wind kicked up, lifting sand into the air in a golden cloud. The hatchling shivered, sand stinging its eyes and nose. The human reacted quickly, lowering the carrier slightly and using a small protective cover to shield the creature. They slowed the vehicle, maneuvering carefully over the uneven terrain. The hatchling pressed close, trusting completely in the human's skill. For the first time, it realized that survival was not just about strength, it was also about intelligence, patience, and courage. Hours passed, and the desert revealed its challenges. Soft sand trapped one wheel, and the human had to work quickly, using levers and treads to free the vehicle. The hatchling watched closely, observing the problem-solving skills of this new friend. It began to understand something important. Humans were clever, adaptable, and determined. Unlike other creatures it had encountered, humans could face impossible odds and still find a way forward. By mid-afternoon, the sun blazed hotter than ever. The hatchling grew tired and restless. Its claws scraped at the carrier as if urging the human to stop, to rest. The human noticed immediately and found a small patch of hard sand between two dunes. They parked the vehicle and lifted the hatchling gently onto the ground. Carefully, they offered water and food, while also shielding it from the sun with a portable canopy. The hatchling drank eagerly, its tiny tongue flicking rapidly, then began nibbling on the soft food. It felt strong again, the energy returning to its legs. It crawled around cautiously, exploring the small patch of shade. The humans sat nearby, their eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Even moments of rest were measured. In the desert, vigilance was survival, but the hatchling felt safe under their watchful presence. While they rested, the human taught the hatchling, in small ways, how to survive the desert. They pointed out safe plants to nibble on, how to avoid soft sand that could trap its claws, and ways to detect shadows of distant predators. The hatchling could not understand words, but the tone, gestures, and gentle guidance carried meaning. Slowly, it learned. It began to mimic the human, watching closely, moving cautiously, testing small ideas on its own. Its mind was sharp, and its instincts began to merge with what it observed. Just as the sun began to lower, the ground trembled slightly beneath them. The human froze, scanning the horizon. The hatchling twitched, sensing the vibration too. From a distant ridge, a massive creature emerged, a desert predator larger than any the hatchling had seen before. Its scales glimmered, its claws dug into the sand, and its eyes glinted with hunger. The hatchling pressed against the human, instinctively seeking protection. The human's hands moved quickly, adjusting a small device that emitted a loud, piercing signal. The predator hesitated, growling, confused by the strange sound. The human's voice rose in calm, commanding tones, though it did not speak the same language as the creature. Somehow, the combination of sound, posture, and confidence made the predator rethink its attack. Slowly, it backed away, disappearing over the ridge into the shifting dunes. The hatchling stared in awe. It had never experienced protection like this before. It had never known that strength could come not just from claws or speed, but from intelligence, courage, and care. Its trust in the human deepened, and a tiny spark of admiration grew in its heart. Survival was no longer just about fleeing or hiding. It was about connection, observation, and learning. As evening settled, the desert cooled. The sky shifted from blazing gold to soft pinks and purples, and stars began to appear, twinkling like scattered diamonds. The human prepared a small campsite again, using a light fire to warm the cooling sand. The hatchling curled up near the base of the fire, eyes half closed but alert. It listened to the soft crackle, the whisper of wind, the distant call of desert creatures. The desert felt less hostile tonight. It felt alive, mysterious, and full of lessons waiting to be learned. The human continued teaching, showing the hatchling how to find safe resting spots, how to detect subtle signs in the sand, and how to use shadows for guidance. Every lesson was simple, careful, and practical. The hatchling learned quickly, practicing each skill with growing confidence. It began to understand the value of patience, observation, and thinking ahead. Each small victory made it stronger, braver, more capable. Night deepened, and the air grew chilly. The hatchling shivered but felt secure under the human's watchful presence. It had survived countless hours alone, rejected by its own kind, yet now it had a companion, a protector, and a teacher. The bond between them had grown stronger with every hour. The human's care and intelligence, combined with the hatchling's determination and resilience, created a partnership neither had expected but both needed. Before sleep, the hatchling pressed against the human's hand, a silent gesture of gratitude. The human smiled, eyes reflecting the firelight and stars above, and whispered softly. The hatchling did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear: safety, guidance, and hope. It had learned something extraordinary. Even in a harsh, unforgiving desert, connection and trust could create strength. Tomorrow, the human promised, they would continue toward the oasis. The journey would be long, filled with dangers and challenges, but together they could survive. The hatchling, once hopeless and rejected, now felt determination. It had learned that intelligence, care, and courage could overcome even the most difficult odds. As the fire burned low and stars sparkled overhead, the hatchling closed its eyes, feeling a new kind of hope. For the first time, it believed that survival was not just possible, it was probable. And it knew deep inside that with this human beside it, it could face anything the desert might throw at them. The desert woke with a gentle warmth, the sun climbing slowly over the endless dunes. The albino hatchling stirred, stretching its tiny legs, feeling stronger than ever. It had grown accustomed to the human's presence, and a small spark of confidence glimmered in its red eyes. The previous day had taught it lessons about the desert, how to find shade, how to move cautiously, and how to trust in the human's guidance. Today, the journey would continue. The human checked the vehicle and carrier carefully. Every journey in the desert carried risks: shifting sand, hidden soft spots, and sudden predators. The human's experience was their greatest tool. Every adjustment they made, every careful movement of the vehicle, was a lesson in patience and intelligence. The hatchling watched closely, noting the methodical way the human worked, learning more about planning and foresight than it had ever imagined possible. Once the vehicle began rolling over the dunes again, the hatchling leaned forward, eyes wide with curiosity. The desert stretched endlessly, golden waves under the bright sun. Small plants clung stubbornly to life and tiny insects darted across the sand. Even in this harsh place, life endured. The hatchling felt inspired. It began testing its tiny legs inside the carrier, pushing and stretching, growing stronger with each movement. Hours passed, and the heat grew intense. The hatchling felt its energy wane slightly, and the human noticed immediately. They stopped near a cluster of rocks that provided natural shade. Carefully, the human lifted the hatchling onto solid ground, offering water and soft food. The hatchling drank eagerly, then nibbled the food, regaining strength quickly. As they rested, a distant sound made both alert. A sudden gust of wind carried the low hum of movement across the dunes. The human scanned the horizon with experienced eyes. A sandstorm was approaching, far enough to allow preparation, but fast enough that delay would be dangerous. The desert demanded respect, and experience meant the difference between life and death. The human acted quickly. They secured the hatchling in a protective carrier, covering it with a lightweight shield to block flying sand. Tools and supplies were tied down, and the vehicle's engine was adjusted to handle the upcoming storm. The hatchling pressed close, feeling the careful attention and protection. Its heart raced, not with fear but with anticipation. It had learned to trust this being completely. The storm arrived with sudden fury. Winds whipped across the dunes, lifting clouds of sand into the air, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The hatchling felt the sand sting its eyes, claw, and skin, but the protective cover and human guidance shielded it from the worst. The vehicle groaned and rattled over the shifting terrain, but the human remained steady, hands firm on the controls. Their knowledge, experience, and calm presence turned chaos into manageable danger. Hours passed slowly under the storm. The hatchling stayed quiet, listening to the roaring winds and feeling the vibrations of the vehicle beneath it. It realized something profound. Intelligence, preparation, and patience could conquer challenges that raw strength could not. It had been born fragile, rejected, and small, but now it was learning to survive alongside a being who could turn danger into safety. When the storm finally passed, the desert was quiet again. The hatchling peered out of the protective carrier. The dunes were changed, some flattened, some taller, some hiding new holes. The desert was alive, always shifting, always testing those who walked upon it. The human carefully navigated the vehicle through this new terrain, adjusting speed and direction to avoid hazards. The hatchling followed every move, learning from observation, slowly beginning to anticipate the human's actions. By mid-afternoon, the temperature soared again. The hatchling grew tired from the storm, but its energy returned as soon as it drank water from the human's careful offering. The human paused under a cluster of rocks, allowing the hatchling to explore safely in the shade. Tiny claws dug into the sand as it tested the stability of the ground. The human smiled, watching the hatchling adapt. Every small step, every tiny test of courage was a victory. As the sun fell lower, the human began teaching the hatchling in more subtle ways. They pointed out safe areas to walk, plants that could provide moisture, and signs of distant predators. The hatchling could not understand words fully, but it watched gestures, listened to tone, and absorbed every lesson. Its mind grew sharper and its instincts became more refined. It began moving with purpose, testing ideas the human had taught and learning from experience. Evening brought another challenge. A cliff blocked the path, steep and treacherous, with loose sand and jagged rocks. The hatchling froze, unsure how to proceed. The human examined the terrain carefully, then found a safe route along the edge. They guided the hatchling step by step, showing it how to navigate without slipping. The hatchling followed cautiously, learning to trust its own judgment while relying on guidance when needed. It realized that survival required both independence and partnership. Once safely across, the desert spread ahead like a golden sea, and in the distance, a faint shimmer caught their eyes. The human squinted, then smiled. The shimmer was the distant oasis, the promise of water, shade, and life. The hatchling felt a surge of excitement it had never known. The journey had been difficult, but hope now burned bright in its tiny heart. It began moving more eagerly inside the carrier, pushing forward, eager to reach safety. The human slowed the vehicle, careful of the soft sand patches ahead. They spoke softly, words of encouragement, tone calm and reassuring. The hatchling pressed against the human's hand, feeling warmth, safety, and companionship. It realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust and guidance. Every challenge faced together had made it stronger, braver, and wiser. Night fell, and stars spread across the sky. The temperature dropped, but the hatchling no longer shivered in fear. It had learned from the human how to find warmth, how to conserve energy, and how to stay alert without panic. The human built a small fire near a rock shelter, careful to keep it controlled. The hatchling curled beside the warmth, eyes reflecting the flickering flames, feeling comforted by the human's presence. As they rested, the hatchling reflected on the journey. It had traveled from hopelessness and rejection to a place of safety, learning the value of observation, patience, and connection. Every lesson from the human had shaped it, preparing it for a life that once seemed impossible. The hatchling pressed its tiny head against the human's hand, a silent gesture of gratitude and trust. The human looked down, smiling softly. They had faced dangers before, but the companionship of this fragile, determined creature had changed them as well. They had found meaning in care, patience, and guidance. The desert was still dangerous, but together they could face it. They had proven that intelligence, courage, and compassion could overcome challenges the strongest alone could not survive. The night was quiet but alive. Desert creatures moved in the shadows, the wind whispered over the dunes, and stars sparkled endlessly above. The hatchling closed its eyes, feeling secure, strong, and hopeful. Tomorrow, the final stretch to the oasis awaited, a place of water, shade, and life. The journey was not over, but the bond between them had grown unbreakable. Together, they could survive anything the desert could throw at them. And so, under the endless sky, the albino hatchling slept peacefully, dreaming of water, green plants, and safety. The humans sat nearby, watching the stars, aware of the fragile life they had saved and nurtured. In a harsh, unforgiving world, they had created a moment of trust, courage, and hope, proof that even in the hardest places, intelligence, care, and determination could prevail. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the dunes with soft gold and orange hues. The albino hatchling stirred in its carrier, blinking against the early light. Today was the final stretch of their journey. In the distance, the shimmer of the oasis glimmered like a promise: water, shade, life. The hatchling's tiny heart pounded with excitement and nervous anticipation. It had come so far from the lonely, hopeless hours in the sand. Now the destination was close, yet still needed careful approach. The human checked the vehicle one last time. Supplies were secure, the carrier stable, and the path ahead carefully chosen. The desert, though calmer than before, remained unpredictable. Loose sand, hidden dips, and sudden wind gusts could pose danger at any moment. The human adjusted the vehicle controls, eyes scanning the horizon for subtle signs of change. The hatchling pressed forward in the carrier, watching, learning, and trusting completely. As they moved, the desert seemed to respond. A gentle wind carried the scent of water and plants, faint but unmistakable. The hatchling twitched its nose, catching the promise of life. Its small legs itched to move, but the human allowed patience to guide them. Every lesson of survival had taught the hatchling that rushing could be dangerous. The human's careful, calm leadership had shown it how to endure and adapt. Mid-morning brought the first real challenge. A wide patch of soft sand stretched between two ridges, threatening to trap the vehicle. The human slowed, assessing the ground carefully. The hatchling's instincts screamed to panic, but the human's calm tone reassured it. Step by step, the vehicle advanced, wheels digging but moving steadily. The hatchling felt the vibration of the engine, the careful pressure of the wheels, and a deep understanding began to form. It was not alone. Together, they could overcome obstacles that neither could face alone. When they reached solid ground, the hatchling pressed its claws into the sand, exploring with renewed energy. It had grown so much since the first day, stronger, braver, wiser. It sniffed the air, tasting the subtle scents of plants and water. The oasis was near. Tiny ripples of excitement ran through its body. Every challenge it had faced, every lesson from the human had led to this moment. As they neared the oasis, the human slowed, scanning for hidden dangers. Predators often lurked near water, waiting for the weak or unsuspecting. But this time, the hatchling did not fear. It had grown, adapted, learned how to move cautiously and understand the world around it. The human and hatchling moved together, step by careful step, until the lush green of the oasis spread fully before them. The oasis was breathtaking. Crystal clear water reflected the sun, surrounded by green plants and tall, hardy trees. Birds and small creatures moved freely, drinking and resting. Life thrived here in a way that seemed impossible just days ago. The hatchling's eyes widened. Never before had it seen so much abundance, so much safety. Its claws dug into the soft earth, and it took its first real steps toward freedom. The human gently lifted the hatchling from the carrier and set it on solid ground. The creature hesitated for a moment, looking back at the vehicle and the human. Then, with a small, determined push, it stepped forward. Water lapped at the edges of the oasis, and the hatchling approached cautiously. Its reflection shimmered on the surface. For the first time, it saw not just a pale, fragile creature, but a survivor. The human watched with pride. They had traveled across harsh dunes, braved sandstorms, and faced danger together. Through care, patience, and intelligence, they had helped a tiny life reach a place where it could thrive. Yet it was not just survival. It was growth, learning, and hope. Humanity had shown the hatchling something extraordinary: compassion, guidance, and the ability to turn hopelessness into opportunity. The hatchling stepped into the water, dipping claws cautiously. The cool sensation sent a shiver through its body, a mixture of relief and delight. The human knelt nearby, letting it explore freely while remaining close. Tiny insects buzzed near the water, plants swayed gently in the wind, and the sound of life filled the air. The hatchling explored, drinking, testing the water, and even splashing slightly. Every step was a small celebration of life and survival. Over the next few hours, the hatchling discovered the oasis fully. Hidden nooks provided shelter, shady trees offered protection from the sun, and plentiful water promised survival. It moved confidently now, remembering lessons from the human: how to observe the environment, how to test the ground, how to detect danger without panic. The desert had taught it strength, but the human had taught it wisdom. Together, these lessons made the hatchling capable and independent. The human stayed nearby, letting the hatchling explore, but also keeping watch. Every once in a while, they spoke softly, guiding it toward safe areas or showing how to climb slightly elevated sand ridges to observe the oasis fully. The hatchling listened, learning quickly. Its mind absorbed knowledge like a sponge, merging instincts with new skills. It had grown beyond a fragile, hopeless hatchling into a confident, capable creature. Evening approached, painting the sky in gold, pink, and purple. The oasis glowed in the fading light, and the hatchling rested near the water, claws tucked beneath its body. It had found safety, food, and shelter, everything it had once lacked. The human smiled softly, watching this tiny life thrive against the odds. They had faced countless challenges to reach this point, yet the reward was clear: life saved, hope restored, and a bond forged in adversity. The hatchling pressed its tiny head against the human's hand, a gesture of trust, gratitude, and recognition. Though it could not speak, its feelings were clear. It had survived, learned, and grown, and it owed much of this to the human who had guided it through the desert's dangers. The human laughed softly, a sound full of warmth and joy, and whispered reassurances. Though words were not necessary, the hatchling understood the care and love in the tone. Night fell fully, and stars spread across the sky, endless and sparkling. The desert was silent around the oasis, the sounds of water and insects creating a gentle rhythm. The hatchling curled up near the human, eyes closing slowly. It had been a long journey filled with fear, danger, and uncertainty. Yet now, in safety and abundance, it felt something new: hope. Hope for life, for growth, and for a future it could not have imagined when it first hatched alone in the sand. The human watched the stars, reflecting on the journey. Across the harsh desert, they had discovered a life struggling against impossible odds, and through patience, intelligence, and care, they had helped it survive and thrive. Humanity's ability to guide, protect, and nurture had made the impossible possible. And in return, the hatchling had taught them something too: resilience, courage, and the remarkable power of hope in even the smallest life. The night passed peacefully. The hatchling slept under the gentle warmth of the oasis, dreaming of plants, water, and endless skies. The human sat nearby, silently vowing to protect and guide it as it learned to live in this new world. Together, they had faced challenges that could have ended life in the desert. Together, they had survived, learned, and grown. Morning came with a gentle glow. The hatchling stirred, claws flexing, eyes bright with curiosity. The oasis awaited, full of opportunities and lessons yet to be learned. It had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable. The human smiled, knowing that the small creature had become more than a survivor. It had become a life capable of thriving, learning, and exploring the world in ways it had never imagined. The hatchling looked up at the human, red eyes filled with understanding and recognition. For the first time, it felt not just safety but belonging. It was no longer alone. The desert had been harsh and unforgiving, yet through courage, patience, and guidance, life had endured. And the human, a stranger who had become a protector and teacher, had shown that even in the hardest worlds, hope, intelligence, and care could change everything. And so, the albino hatchling sat by the water, gazing at its reflection in the crystal-clear surface. Its scales glimmered in the morning sun, strong and bright. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had reached a place of safety, abundance, and life. It had learned to survive, to trust, to explore, and to grow. It had discovered courage, intelligence, and hope, and it had learned that even the smallest life could thrive with guidance, patience, and compassion. The human watched from nearby, satisfied and proud. The desert still stretched beyond the oasis, wild and unpredictable, but the small hatchling had grown beyond fear. The journey had proven something extraordinary. Life, no matter how fragile or hopeless it seemed, could endure and flourish with care, courage, and wisdom. And in the vast desert, under endless skies, a tiny albino hatchling had found its place, and a friend who had changed its world forever.